If you'd like to contact the show, send us an email at liveonfourlegspodcast@gmail.com or get involved in the conversation on social media. Join the Pearl Jam Podcast community group on Facebook or follow us on Twitter at liveonfourlegspod.
I wanted to share something with you. 1 year ago today, the world lost a legend, and you know him as Johnny Ramone. And myself and the band and the crew, we were fortunate to know him as our friend. And I'd like to dedicate this evening's show to Johnny. He lives inside all of us. And away we go.
You're listening to Live on Four Legs, the live Pearl Jam podcast experience, featuring
Mr. Stone Gossard. Fucking Cameron in the drum. Mr. Boom Gasper. You can call me Al, you can call me Ed, you just fucking call me, why don't you?
Everybody now, welcome to Live on Four Legs, a definitive live Pearl Jam podcast. We're back with another episode today, and as mentioned about, 1,000 times already, and it's mid-February, this is the year for anniversaries. We have special milestone anniversaries. We've done a couple of the Vitalogy era 1995 shows that are celebrating their 30th, and for this episode, we will cover, for the 20th anniversary, that 2005 Canadian tour that is so good, and we're going to talk about a real good one today in Montreal. This is a tour, again, we've talked about it before. They went through the whole entire country from Vancouver all the way over to St. John's, and they made a stay of it. A really exciting, I think it was like 15 or so shows throughout the course of it, and the Montreal show is special in its own right, kind of coming smack dab in the middle of everything. So we're going to get to talking about that. There's a theme for the show that we're going to talk about for the most part here. And also, we can get to talk about the Saturday Night Live homecoming performance that Ed was involved with the Roots. That should be a lot of fun, and it was a very good performance. We're going to get into that in just a second here. So, let's introduce and start the show. Randy Sobel over here. And over there today, we have a replacement player because Javier, unfortunately, got ill on a vacation, and we wish him well, and he will be back next week at full strength, we're hoping. And in his replacement is one half of Hallucinogenic Recipe, Patrick Bogle. What's going on, man?
Hey, how's it going, Randy? I have one war, so I can amply replace for this one podcast.
All right, so we're good for one game. But after that, you falter.
Absolutely. I know my limits.
Well, we won't have to talk about the Pog or, vacuum sounds out of Mike's guitar, even though it does come up in this show. But we definitely have a good knowledge base here because you were at this show and you have great stories that you have to tell from it. But I think first, why don't we kick off, just kind of spend a couple minutes talking about these performances that happened on SNL. And when Ed got announced as one of the performers, and I mean, it was a who's list of people that have just been in the entertainment world. And it was honestly, overall, a really good show. Even the artists that I really don't care for at all. I thought Miley Cyrus killed it. I thought that Cher was fun. Everybody that was a part of it, I mean, David Byrne, just him showing up in the jacket and everything like that was incredible. It was just one of those performances, it kind of reminded me a little bit of the Hurricane Sandy performance that everybody was involved with. It was like every classic rock artist that generated in the Northeast, like Bruce and Bon Jovi, and then guys like Roger Waters, which Ed performed Comfortably Numb with. It reminded me a lot of that if it was just this big names all coming together, something that you just don't see a whole lot. Even like at stuff like the Grammys, I just don't think of that as being that, especially if there's a lot of new artists, but it felt like a really good mix between a little bit of the old, a little bit of the new, and somewhere in between.
Yeah, it definitely was a very, very eclectic mix of years of performers from SNL, and you definitely hit the nail on the head. You got a lot of like really interesting takes on the history of the music side, and everybody should also go watch the documentary, which is pretty cool. That goes and like kind of looks back at the past of the musical history, but the performance was definitely a very, very interesting mix of music over the history of the show.
What did you think that Ed was going to end up doing when he was announced? Because I mean, so many thoughts go into my head, and there was one where I'm like, "Uh-oh, Jimmy Fallon's hosting. Oh no, he's going to do balls in your mouth," and like, it's just one of this sinking feeling, like, "Oh, we're in for that." Like he's just going to be used for that. But honestly, like, not just with the two songs that he played, the Lonely Island performance that he was a part of, and also a shout out during the Will Ferrell sketch. He was kind of prominent throughout this show. Like they seemed to kind of make a big deal, like, oh, he's here, so celebrate it, you know?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, remember, like it's been a while since they've been on the show, but they obviously the '92 appearance, the '94 appearance, they have a special place, especially with a lot of the cast from that time, from the '90s era. So not too surprising to see them harken back and take advantage of that. I had no expectations of what he might play. I assumed it would be potentially one of the singles that he's been doing the last couple of years, covers, whether it be the stuff for the Bear or what have you. But I had no preconceived notion. In hindsight, it kind of makes a lot of sense that he played The Waiting, that all started to gel as a kind of an obvious nod to a hero and a good friend.
Yeah, there was a feeling in my head that one of the options was probably going to be I Won't Back Down. And obviously, from just seeing him on the list and not seeing Pearl Jam there, you think, okay, well, it's going to be Ed with an acoustic guitar, or he's just going to do his thing on his own. But, him and the Roots. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not his first time with the Roots either. That was a performance that I believe they did all night together. And I think Olay was something else that the Roots were on. I can't remember if they were on Olay or not.
They definitely did All Night. It's possible that they did Olay too. That's not one that I've gone back to very much.
No, yeah, for good reason, right? I thought, like, his connection on stage with Captain Kirk was just awesome. They were making eye contact, they were grooving the whole entire time. And then he does the whole bit where, he shouts out, like, he's like, "Oh, this would mean so much more if I'm going to mention a name. I'm going to mention Gilda." And he mentions John Belushi, and he mentions Chris Farley, and of course, his good friend Norm Macdonald. So him playing The Waiting, and even it's like 8 years now since we lost Tom, but how many times are we going to hear that he's still grieving and mourning over his loss? And that's a lot of the theme of this episode today, as a matter of fact, is, grieving over loss. And I mean, Tom Petty's, of course, another piece of SNL history, playing SNL multiple times. And it just made sense. It just made sense. And I'm glad that he chose The Waiting, because that's not a song that he usually does. So you got a little of the something new, even though Petty's an artist that, think about it, Room at the Top and I Won't Back Down. And there's a lot of different songs that he's performed of Petty's. But it's cool because what we know of The Waiting is that during that little run in 2006 where they opened up for Tom and the Heartbreakers, he got to go on stage and perform The Waiting with Tom. So that's just a cool little tie-in. And then, of course, he starts singing Less Than Zero, the Elvis Costello song that was supposed to be performed in 1977. And then Elvis in the middle of his like, nope, 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 we're not doing this. Nope, nope, nope. I want to do something else. And I honestly didn't catch it at first. And I know that moment. I know that moment really well. And I didn't catch that that's what he was doing. I guess I just didn't recognize that it was less than zero. And Ed does the same thing. Nope, 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 nope. Let's do something else. Let's do something else. Cut it. And they go right into Corduroy. But I mean, there were a lot of great throwback moments. Mumford doing the boxer was a great throwback moment from that show. And even going into the actual anniversary special that happened on Sunday night, Miley Cyrus and Brittany Howard doing Nothing Compares to You, another throwback to the history of SNL, of course, with Sinead O'Connor. I thought it was just perfect. He absolutely nailed it.
Yeah, definitely. That was really a cool way to watch him work with the Roots, to have hashed out that song with them. It came off really well.
And I got to mention this as well because it's this on the same wavelength here. And at first I was like, wait a minute, Ed's got to be involved in this. And then once you heard what was happening, you're like, okay, maybe Ed doesn't need to be involved. So Rockin' in the Free World, the performance that Neil Young had, and I think it was like 89 on SNL, was and still is regarded as one of the greatest performances in the history of that show. And when Jack White comes out and he does it, I'm in shock because I don't think he's going to do that. I think he's just going to do Seven Nation Army and he's going to walk off. But it was so well done, and he kept it so true to that Neil, specifically that Neil version. And also, if you hear him and the way that he was singing, like he was completely in the Neil zone, even down to the haircut. His like ear length haircut that he had looked like Neil Young. He was really doing a good service of paying homage to that moment. I thought it was just tremendous.
He was playing through a few shows leading up to that. He had covered at least once, if not twice. So he had been working on it to get it set up for the event. Clearly, he's been doing these like kind of crazy, jagged little tour that he's been doing where he'll show up and play at a club, and then he's also playing at a planned venue. So he was, I think it was actually, it might have been in Toronto that he had just played Rockin' in the Free World right before the SNL get together.
Show I was trying to get tickets to, of course.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't, and it turned out I didn't have money for it anyway, so it wouldn't have mattered. But still, I have to go and check out his show at some point. The only time I've seen him in any form was with the Raconteurs when they opened up for Bob Dylan back in 2006. And
Oh wow.
yeah, they were incredible. That's my takeaway from that. Don't remember anything from Bob Dylan. I don't think I need to, but the Raconteurs were phenomenal that night.
Nice.
And I think, you got to mention it because it is important here, but the Post Malone performance with the surviving members of Nirvana, give a lot of credit to him. I'm not a Post Malone fan, and I don't love his version of like Better Man or Them Bones or some of the other songs that he's done, but I thought when he did Smells Like Teen Spirit a couple nights ago, I thought he was really, really good. So
when I heard that it happened, I took a step back and I was like, but then after watching it, I mean, he did it justice. And that's not an easy thing to do. That could have gone all sorts of sideways, but I think he stepped in, and you could see the band was having a good time doing it too. And they're obviously not getting the opportunity to do those things very often. They've done it here and there with a couple of different variations, but he did it justice.
So I think with that all being said, good recent stuff that kind of whet our appetite for a couple of months when we do get the shows. It still feels like eons away, especially from everything that's happening weather-wise in places that both you and I are. It does feel like it is a long time, but it's only 2 months and we can wait impatiently for that. But let's get into Montreal here. Let's get into the show that we're going to cover today. So this is a show that you were at right smack dab in the middle, you did this. And it's funny because it's actually very interesting you covering this episode because way back when you covered the Ottawa episode too. So you kind of have the double dose here for both of these shows that you went to in 2005. And I'll actually read what you wrote here in our Discord about just the year 2005, and you said it. You said 2005 tour is the best tour year, most consistently excellent shows. Like, it's hard to disagree with that because the band was on top of their game. But expand upon that. Why do you think it's stands above everything else?
They just were in such an incredible groove at this time. And I think they were starting to feel the most comfortable that they had kind of ever felt. They get past the trauma of the 2000 tour, Roskilde, and getting through that. Then they're trying to get their feet wet with Riot Act and really kind of figure out who they are as a band in this sort of second stage. This is them in complete control and abundantly confident to do whatever they please any given night. From the moment that they set out in Missoula for the kickoff show, and then they do the gorge, and then make their way up into British Columbia and start the trek across Canada. It's just every night is just chock full of incredible performances. I mean, it's just a remarkable prowess in their playing and just absolute confidence. It builds, and there's extensions of this that certainly carry itself out into the 06 tour as they unleash self-titled and, really start to incorporate another next stage in what they're doing. But what you get in here is sort of that bridge between eras where you can tell that they've been working on an album, but they're just in such a locked-in position playing-wise. I mean, this is the beginning, really, of like the solidification of the Matt Cameron era of Pearl Jam, if that makes any sense. Like, this is really where it's a line of demarcation for me of what Pearl Jam was and then what they are in the, for lack of better terms, sort of like the second half of their career.
No, I don't disagree with that at all. I think you nailed it just about it being in between the eras. I love tours like this because they don't have like an agenda when it comes to the shows. It's not like what we had this past year with Dark Matter, where it's like, okay, well, we have to get the 4 songs in at the beginning of the show and then kind of spread them out. There are how many Riot? There are 2 Riot Act songs at this show. And I usually call this, believe it or not, I seem to call this the Lost Dogs tour because it felt like a lot of the Lost Dogs were being broken down. There are 4 Lost Dogs, and that's including Last Kiss, that are played at the show, and that's pretty good. But you get a song like Sad, that's something that they were playing a lot this year, and Down was being played a lot. So this really felt like they were able to mix it up more, and especially because they had 7 studio albums under their belt. They had tons of B-sides and rarities with the Lost Dogs under their belt, and also songs like Man of the Hour that they'll play at the show, and then some other covers that they were starting to get into the groove of. There's just a lot in the catalog that every show at this point can be different and deserve to be different. Before we get into talking about the set, let's get into some of your memories of this show. So what about this, like, you went to some 2003 shows. I don't know if you went to any 2004 shows. I don't remember ever talking to you about that, but did you skip the Vote for Change tour at all, or?
I wasn't able to get into any of those. I had just moved from New Jersey up to the Albany area in the winter of 03-04, and by the time the fall came around, there wasn't a show that was close enough really to get to. I mean, in theory, I could have went to potentially the ones out in Boston would have been semi-close. They weren't the Vote for Change shows, but they were kind of like the kickoff of them getting out on the road for those. So everything that I did through that was immediate downloads of live tapes and just living through it vicariously. So when this came around, it was, okay, what can I get to? What's going to work the best? And the loop that they were doing through Ontario and parts of Quebec were what made the most sense. And it just happened kind of perfectly that this show and the Ottawa show were Thursday, Friday. So I had one of my brothers. He's kind of been like a Pearl Jam good luck charm to a certain extent. He's gone to Randall's Island with me, which are some pretty killer shows. He ended up at Madison Square Garden night 2 in 98. He also ended up with me at the third Jones Beach show in 2000. He had a track record for triggering good events around Pearl Jam. So I was like, why don't you come to these shows with me? At the time, my kids were super young, so they were not even 1. And my daughter was 3.5, 4.5. So it was definitely a gotta find the right mix, and these were the right shows to go to. So we drove up Thursday morning from Albany real early so that we could get into Montreal. I wanted to take him through the old city because I had gone the show in 03 and spent a couple of days up there. So I was like, I really want to get and show you this area. We got up there probably, I want to say around noonish, 1 o'clock. I foolishly tried to park my car in a street spot thinking I was going to save money. We'll get back to how bad of an idea that was. And then we kind of hoofed it to just go down and check out where the venue was and pick up our tickets, because you got to do at that time it was go to the 10 Club line and pick up your tickets, grab the tickets, and then spend some time in Old City. One of the things that I actually had to set up for my brother was like 2005 border crossing was starting to get into a different place post 9/11, and I was like, don't bring any pot with you. I was like, we can't cross the border. I am now a new parent. I cannot deal with anything like that. You cannot do that. So I tried to kind of lay down a just don't do it element. That creeps up as we got into the show. You know, Slater Kenny opened. Ed does a preset. Slater Kenny comes on. He disappears for a couple minutes, comes back, and he is claimed to have met a French-Canadian Rasta man in the bathroom. Magical stash of pot that he got in the bathroom at the Bell Center. And I'm like, that seems like an unlikely coincidence. But anyway, I'm going to go on and just allow that because I was in the midst of enjoying Slater Kenny's performance. But yeah, I never actually grilled him on it, but I very much doubt that there was a French-Canadian Rasta selling pot in the bathroom at the Bell Center, but I could be wrong.
Well, now you don't need one because it's legal. It doesn't matter anymore. So maybe he has his own store somewhere. He can actually have a storefront in a real business now. But all right. Well, look, you mentioned the preset, and let's dig into the preset. You were in your seat by that time, I'm sure. I mean, you're savvy to it. You know what's going on. I think that's happening for the majority of this tour where he's coming out and he's doing a solo song.
Yeah, these were the days where there was no chance that I was going to not be in my seats for the opening band. Odds were always very high that he'd be out potentially to do a preset. Plus, I was there, and part of the big draw to me was they were doing this tour with Slater Kenny. It was doubly nice to be able to catch them a couple of nights as well. So I was ecstatic to see them. Yeah, when Ed walked out to do a song and he whipped out an acoustic, thinking, okay, what are going to be Hide Your Love Away or something along those lines. And he jumps right into Don't Be Shy. And that was like, it's one that I immediately, when he started dabbling in it, I love Cat Stevens as a kid, just like by osmosis. A lot of my music came in that way from siblings of mine playing stuff. And one of my sisters was a big Cat Stevens fan, so I knew his music just by probably age 4 from constantly hearing songs like Don't Be Shy played, and to be able to actually catch that, it was one of those golden moments of a preset opener. You can get some things that are like, okay, that was fun, but this was one of the better presets that I was able to catch.
Better than a song. Love is where all of us belong. So don't be shy, just let your feelings roll on.
Surprisingly, this is not the only Cat Stevens song that's being played at this show. And I think for those of you who are pretty privy to the knowledge of what other Cat Stevens songs he can sometimes play, there's one other song that he gets to later in the set. And I'm going to save this for when we get to that song, but there's a reason why we see not just one, but two Cat Stevens songs. And believe it or not, it might be surprising to some of you, but there's a reason for it. So let's get into kind of the reason for why this show ends up how it is. So the date is September 15th, 2005, obviously. September 15th, 2004 was the date that Johnny Ramone had passed away. And for anybody that knows and understands the history between the two, Eddie and Johnny were really good friends. They were very, very close. I believe the story goes that he spent his last days together with Johnny. He was there, I believe, he talked about it in one show that like they were playing baseball trivia together, and then later that day he had passed away. And obviously, I think a lot of people know the connection between Ed and the Ramones and how big of a Ramones fan he was, especially we got to see in like 1995, the Ramones open up a couple shows, and then Ed being featured on some of the Ramones' last shows in 1996. There was a connection there. He inducted them into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and he helped kind of pave this way in the early 2000s of, let's keep their memory alive. Like they're a more important band than you think, outside of the surface of just being intimidating punk band with the sunglasses and leather jackets and everything like that. They influenced everything that came after them. And him and Johnny became really close, and he'll still talk about Johnny to this day. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that I didn't do purposefully, but I'm glad I kind of did it, was that on the Fenway Night one this past year, it was the same date. It was September 15th. And one of the shirts that I had bought, I had seen a picture of Johnny and Ed and Cornell. Just crazy to see a picture of the three of them. I think it was at a Lollapalooza one year. And Johnny was wearing a shirt that was like a Yoo-Hoo shirt with himself on it. And I said, that's maybe one of the greatest shirts I've ever seen in my life. I need to go find how I can purchase that. And I wanted to get it for the MSG show this past year, but it didn't ship in time. I mean, it was coming from some third world country somewhere, I'm sure. But I got it in time for that Fenway show. And it wasn't even until I saw somebody tweeting at me saying that, do you think they'll do I Believe in Miracles today because it's the 20-year death anniversary? I'm like, oh shit. I didn't even realize that, and I'm wearing the shirt. So, I was in GA. I doubt Ed got to see the shirt, and he didn't mention his name at all, but just kind of one of those cool little connection things. So this whole entire show is essentially dedicated to Johnny. And of course, when you're dedicating a show to somebody, when you are trying to keep somebody's memory alive and celebrate it, usually the song that you're going to open your show with is Release, and that's what they're going to do right here.
Oh, dear John, can you see us now? I am myself like you somehow. I'll ride away where it takes me.
so much to unpack here. I mean, the first time that he does the "Oh Dear John," he chokes up, and then he says, "I am myself thanks to you somehow." And you can tell it's having an effect on him. I mean, there have been moments like this before where, he's singing for somebody that he had lost. We saw it this past year. I believe it was his Uncle John's 10th anniversary since his passing at the LA show when they did Long Road. And he mentioned it during the song, which is very, very unlike them to do. But, I mean, stuff like this, it just brings everybody in together and kind of understands what's going on in that stage and what's going on in his head. And it's a moment of healing for the band. And maybe even people in the crowd that, are huge Ramones fans, as yourself, that are thinking, like, at that time, Tommy was the only original member left. And he passed away about a decade ago. So there are no original Ramones members alive. Marky's still around and kicking, and I think some of the other guys are still around, but no original Ramones members that are still alive, and that's just sad to think about. But, I mean, you can just tell in his voice there's some trepidation there, but also he was definitely trying to make a statement.
He knows also that he fought through getting a little bit choked up there, because he comes back around to it the second time. He rarely does that, where he's going to bring up the person that he's thinking about in the song twice, but he does it the second time as well. But he's much more locked in at that point. He got through whatever was eating at his heart at that moment and kind of rebounds pretty tremendously. His vocals on this are about as good as you can get on release.
You recognize that in the first go around of the chorus that he does the "release me," which obviously he usually does the "whoa" instead.
Yep.
But he does the full "release me" on that as well. Like, I thought
Yeah.
I mean, that's probably him just getting lost in the moment, if anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you said, his vocals are tremendous. Just a crisp sounding version of this. Stone's riff sounds full. The notes feel like they're traveling. And to not have this as a moment that they're going to get to later, as a dedication, middle of the set, to just get the monkey off your back right from the start, I think was the way to go with this. Because, I mean, there's going to be so many songs that are going to be in tribute to him, but you can see with the first four here, I'm going to just smash them all together. Corduroy, Last Exit, Save You, and Animal, because you think about those songs and you think about them individually, and individually they're pretty damn good, but you think about them all together and, ooh, yeah, they want to set a statement here. So I think they wanted to get the monkey off their back real early on and just get into this set and get started, because I think that also fuels what's to come here. Like, Corduroy was fantastic. It had a match lit under it.
I mean, that's Johnny's favorite Pearl Jam song, so it's not a surprise that that comes out of the gate right after release, and this is about as good as you get in this era with this song. I mean, there was that point in time where this kind of got a little bit sped up and a little bit different arrangement from around 98, 2003. It starts to harken back to those early, like 95, 96 renditions, never quite gets to that full sort of Crazy Horse vibe, but this one has it a bit. It's a really, really solid version. And then when you get into the end jam, you've got three things that are going on. Mike running off his riff to the low end of the fretboard, and Stone just chugging through what sounds like a chainsaw riff, and he just is on fire, the two of them blending perfectly. And then the thing I will say about, you couldn't pick this up in the arena that much. I'm not trying to recreate like a memory in history, but on the bootleg, and this goes for kind of this entire run, you hear Jeff Ament in a way that you will not have heard him before playing at these shows. He goes from being bottom end to another lead player, and you hear his notes so crisply. It is absolutely a clinic. If you are a Jeff Ament fan and you like the bass, the 2005 tour is where you can figure out everything that he does.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the songs in this section that I felt it from, I mean, Save You is just a great song for Jeff in general, and that one you really do get to feel his presence on. I think that Corduroy and Save You are probably the two standouts from the starting bit. Stone just has a nasty, nasty solo in this. Ed screaming and just belting at the top of his lungs. And also, you gotta get to see him unbutton his shirt, and he's wearing a Johnny Ramone shirt under his little overshirt there. And just another dedication to his friend. Just a great section. He even gets so emphatic in this, where he kind of pumps his fist and he falls over. Yeah. And he just kind of like just kind of stays on his knees for a minute or two. And yeah, this was a very, very, very fired up version.
Yeah, we had great seats for both of these shows. We were basically like 7th row, Mike's sort of ish side. We were probably kind of just like in between Ed's front of stage setup. Probably better way to say it is like right in line with Jeff. And when Ed fell, I was like, what? He looked like he kind of just fainted. You know, the way he went down from the vantage point that we're at. When you watch the video now, you can see it's more of a casual, but when you're sitting below him and he just disappears, it was a little bit like, ooh, is he okay? But he pours his emotion into this one, and as you said, Stone lets off a ferocious solo. This is like peak time for this song. Obviously, the Riot Act tour, it was, but like this post evolution time for this song after the album going into 04, 05, 06 is just dynamite versions of Save You.
So Ed says hello, and what's up, and gets a huge reaction here, and he seems pretty overwhelmed by it, and he says we can only surmise it by saying there's a lot of fucking going on in Montreal because it wasn't this populated as the last time that we were here, I believe. We appreciate you coming to hear us play and your energy. I want to share something with you. 1 year ago today, the world lost a legend. You know him as Johnny Ramone. Myself and the band and the crew were fortunate to know him as a friend. I'd like to dedicate this evening's show to Johnny. He lives inside of all of us. So that gives us a section here of, I'm going to count it as 5 songs. And even if you want to count the song after this section too, as just being the grieving section of I Believe in Miracles, which is the direct, we're going to play one of Johnny's songs, Light Years, which is the song that is meant for grieving, Grievance, which on the surface, it's not necessarily a song that has to do with death, but just the title in itself to just kind of add in a little kind of nuanced thing. It makes sense. Sad, another song that's about death. And then Given a Fly, even, I'm going to throw it in here. I think Given a Fly is usually, I kind of mention it sometimes as being the athlete song whenever an athlete retires or something like that, or the moment with Chris Chelios where they announce his number is going to be retired. I think it's always the song where they're celebrating somebody's achievements. And I think that is the tail end of that. Just be like, we're proud of you. You know, we're proud of you for kind of overcoming the obstacles and becoming the Johnny Ramone that everybody knows you as. So what from here kind of sticks out? I think the Miracles cover is definitely the one that is easily attributed to Johnny, but what here sticks out to you?
Well, Fast Miracles is always great. I've been fortunate to catch Miracles 6 times, and I love it when they just play that hard charging. The acoustic ones can be cool too, but the 2 songs in this section that I really, really loved were Light Years, was just so damn good, and it made me realize that this was the last time that I actually caught the song live.
Really?
Was at this show, yeah. It's amazing because they've since then not quite doubled its play count, but nearly, and not at the shows when they were doing it. And the way that it breaks down, there was like a little rebound in 2018 where they played it pretty frequently, but it's not been something that they've really brought back that much. It's like 2s and 3s here when they go out to play it, but it sounded very on point. Sometimes Light Years can get a little bit tricky in terms of the key that it's in and how well it's blending with the 3 guitars, but this is pretty good, pretty on. and sad, despite the fact that Ed starts in the second verse when he breaks into song. If you separate that, which sometimes it's hard to do if you're like OCD, where like I can be with music sometimes, but the band sounds so damn good on that song. I mean, it is ferociously tight how well they're playing it at that point in time. If he nailed the lyrics from this, it's probably easy the best version of Sad that's ever been played, but you know, there's been a number to choose from at this point, but this is the first time I caught it live. The band just sounds so great.
This was a great version of Sad. I fully agree with you here. I mean, I think watching his face on this one, everything once again just like releases pouring out of him. It feels like they are at the top of their game and they can't be stopped. And it's one of those things where, I don't know, you think of like the Brett Favre game where his father passed away and then he went on Monday Night Football and threw like 4 touchdowns for 300 yards or something like that. It's one of those like supernatural things that just seems to happen sometimes when you have something weighing on your mind that you're playing in dedication to somebody that you love. It feels like this show kind of has that vibe. So Ed says something in French and then mentions that the next song is going to be Love Boat Captain while introducing Boom. However, you introduce Boom and you make a big deal about Boom being the Love Boat Captain and how this was really the song that kind of kicked off his entry into the band. And that intro to the song that obviously comes in on the B3 to me is iconic. It's very iconic. However, they were going through something at the time where Ed just felt like playing this on guitar.
Is this just another day? This guy.
He introduces Boom and then he just goes off and he does it himself. I'm not saying that it's bad. I actually kind of like when he does this, and it is very reminiscent of the Jumpin' Jack Flash versions that we would get in 2014 and a little bit later on after that. But Boom's there for a reason. He's there because he's a big hit on 2 songs, and granted, he's going to have a lot of very good moments at this show. But there's 2 significant songs that he's a part of, and you kind of take away his role a little bit. I don't really know how much that flies.
Yeah, it's an odd one. The way I would say that it come around to it was this was clearly in the same vein of the choices of the songs that had been built into the set list. This was him taking this song out, particularly for Johnny. It's a different take on it. I'll also forgive him the fact that guitar tone just sounds so damn good on this.
Right. It's the idea of it instead of criticizing the performance, because the performance was excellent. So yeah. I don't mind that at all.
But I get what you're saying. I mean, it's like Boom's presence in the band, particularly for this song, is that element. So you would have thought there's some way to kind of balance that off and weave it together, but alas.
Again, the song sounds fantastic. They're just in this supernatural groove that's going on right now on a damn tear. Mike goes off on it. And then I think after the song is a notable bit too, because the crowd chants for Boom. And then Ed says his presence, again, talking about his presence when they wrote it changed the whole thing. Then let him play his part. But before that, it was about President Bush, and it was called Love Boat Asshole. Actually, no, it was called Greed Boat Asshole. Corporate greed boat asshole behind the counter in an Oval Office. Apparently, and I don't know what he's talking about here. I did not go back and look at the news from September 15th, 2005, but he would sometimes do this on tour these couple of later Bush years. He said apparently Bush apologized for something, but it's one of those apologies like when the guy's on the other end of the plank and that's when he apologizes, so it felt insincere.
The best way to describe it is it's post-Katrina stuff. Is where that was all coming from. So this isn't actually even Ed's best stand-up routine. He does a better one the next night. This is what he was doing on this tour. Not that it wasn't worth talking about, but he's trying to find the moment to do it. And I'm not entirely sure that this was the best encapsulation of it, but alas, he did it.
Yeah, and that's just him. Yeah, he's going to say what's on his mind. And I think 20 years later, it's kind of like, oh, well, okay, yeah, we remember that. We remember the whole situation there. But, also it has less meaning to us as we sit here in our own knee deep in shit. So the next two songs are going to be Better Man and Even Flow. You get excellent singing from the crowd on Better Man. And something I kind of noticed a lot at this show, I noticed it a lot in Better Man, is that there are moments where Jeff and Mike are just side by side jamming together the whole entire time. Your memory of that, you said you were like right in front of Jeff on Jeff's side, and you remember them kind of gravitating towards each other the whole show?
Yeah, I mean, it was two different pockets going on. Jeff and Mike and Stone and Matt all night long were completely locked into one another. And, this is no frills time, too. There's no major light show. This is the days of sheets hanging up on the back and just different colors going in. So you're locked in to watch what the band is doing on stage. You're not distracted by any other visual effects and whatnot. So you're making note of that the whole time. And the two of them were all night long, side by side.
And kind of unlike what Better Man would become, especially like 2003 and onward, was really when the Save It For Later kind of became more of a thing where the Don't Run Away was actually its own section kind of bit. But instead of doing that, it's going to be another nod to Johnny Ramone, and they're going to sing I Want to Be Your Boyfriend here, one of the great Ramone songs, and they basically like do the song. There's chord changes and new progression, and they don't play anything reminiscent of Better Man, and they don't even like go back into the song. It kind of just ends with them doing this. I thought that was awesome. It's just such a cool way of interpreting it.
Hey, little girl, I wanna be your boyfriend. Oh, sweet little girl, I wanna be your boyfriend. You love me, babe. What can I say? What do I say? What can I say?
It was a welcome sort of reapproach on the back end of the song. I mean, Save It For Later had been pretty much the guaranteed tag that you would get night in and night out. But they actually really around this run been dabbling in a couple of different things, whether not even doing Save It For Later at times, also not even tagging it in some instances at all. But this was a really, really well crafted tag. And like you said, it's almost really like a whole song versus a tag.
I believe the show prior to this, they tag Modern Girl on Better Man, and that's Hamilton. And then, like, shortly after that,
Yes.
it would become
Yes.
the Not For
Yeah.
You tag.
Yeah.
So that's just like a little bits of trivia that people kind of forget. Even flow here, I mean, the version just smokes. And unlike last week where you couldn't quite hear Mike over Stone, you hear Mike pretty crystal clear on here, and he's just otherworldly on this. And I really loved the segue getting into that transition for the ending, like everything getting real quiet except for a few stray beats from that. And then they kind of build back real quickly into the ending. I thought that was a really cool way to do it.
Yeah, this is like the precursor to the 2006 Even Flows, where Matt would go off into a extended drum solo off of Mike's solo part, but when it gets down to that hushed silence and he's just given a couple of hi-hats, and then Jeff brings it down and then starts punching bass riffs right before Stone goes into the chord progression back into the final verse, and it's as good as it gets.
Speaking of as good as it gets, the following song will be the alternate version of In My Tree. It feels like it's been so long since we've talked about a version of this on the podcast. And I mean, there've probably been, around a dozen or less, not much more than a dozen versions of this going back to 2003. And I think this or 2006 is the last year where they really do it. So there's not a lot to work off of.
This is a brief period of time where you get this reworked version that, you've got the slow strummy intro on acoustic, then you've got the B3 from Boom in the center, and it's just a completely different sort of vibe on the song.
I can't say enough about Boom's section in this song, and I mean, it kind of makes up for the fact that he didn't get his intro moment in Love Boat Captain, because he always has this big moment. I wonder if that was another thing where it's like, okay, we want to rework In My Tree, but now we have Boom. He has to be a bigger part of this, so let's give him something to work with. And that's kind of how that magic came together. But look, this was really good. Again, not something we cover too often, but like just the way that the lyrics and the chorus are just kind of spaced out. It's another way to skin a cat, for lack of better terms. Hey, who's out there skinning cats? I know, but it's one of those things where they should go back and try this at some point in the future, because it can still work. And especially it might work better now that they have Klinghoffer, and they can throw in more things and maybe kind of change the pace a little bit differently. Like, why not try and make that work?
I think it's also a great way for them to relax the set a little bit. It gives a different sort of moment for them to not be playing something hard and fast, because it breathes a much different pace when they play it this way. And I think it probably would be a welcome sort of mix into the set, even if they're not doing it every night like this. When they play it, if they're doing it occasionally, it gives a little bit of a different vibe.
You mentioned needing something to kind of take it down a little bit after Even Flow, and then their closing bit to the main set's going to be Evolution, Luke, and Porch. So yeah, you do need something in between that kind of has that heart mid-tempo bit there, and then they're going to come out, and Ed once again in Evolution's doing the admire me, admire Johnny Ramone bit, and he kind of does that putting his shirt out, and he's kind of pointing to his shirt. But once again, I'm loving Stone's tone on Evolution here. He extends that second solo. One of my favorite things that Stone can do in any song is taking that second solo and extending it into basically when they break into the end chorus. I thought that this one was tremendous on this, and they were just in a really, really good wheelhouse. And then Lucan's Lucan, but Porch, you have to mention here, there's another dedication. There's a band called Voivod. I don't know them, but a well-regarded musician named Piggy who had passed away at that time. Who are they? Because I feel like you probably know something about them.
Well, they're a Canadian heavy metal band. That's heavy metal's a weird label to put on it, but they did some touring with Soundgarden, and he actually had passed away. Dennis D'Amour is his real name, his stage name, Piggy. When he passed away at the tail end of August, right about the time that the tour was kicking off. But yeah, Matt, his connection with him was touring with them in the early Soundgarden days. They're still playing, but that was a big loss for them.
So this version of Porch is interesting because what I love about this solo here is that right when they transition, it feels like there's no warm up into the transition of the solo. It just feels like they jumped right into the middle. Like, okay, I'm not checking the temperature here. The pool could be either 90 degrees or it could be 30 degrees, but I'm jumping right smack dab in the middle. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, it's an aggressive leap from chorus to him jamming. It's a very sharp break versus the build that typically would happen with the song, but just so damn on. I mean, he is just flying up and down the neck the entire time. And this is another one where I'm going to say it probably 3 times already, but Jeff is playing basically lead bass on this, and it is just phenomenal where he's going. And it's just a sparkling version, a short version, but sparkling.
All right, we are at the encore break here, so let's pause for station identification real quick. And once again, look, we are doing things over at Patreon, and again, getting ready and geared up for the tour upcoming. Content will be coming over there, and yeah, this week Javier and I were going to have that big town hall, but I think we're going to put it on pause so we can talk about it next week. That way we can invite everybody and maybe do some other stuff and maybe do one of the setlist hangmans on that or something like that. But essentially what we're going to do is we're going to just see what you guys are interested in hearing us do for the future, content-wise, and it's just going to give us kind of a glimpse into how we can restructure some things, because there are a lot of people that are on our Patreon, a lot of people that we're very, very thankful that they contribute to, but we're unsure if they're getting what they want from that platform. So we want to make sure what our plans for the future are kind of coinciding with things that they're looking for. So look, we've talked about extra episodes and extra content coming here and there. And I think once the tour starts to really come close, we'll get to do some extra things over there that I have planned. But there's some things we talked about, and I just want to make sure that especially people on Patreon, but people also that support the show in any facet, whether you're a subscriber or whether you follow along on Facebook or Twitter or Blue Sky even, we just want to know what you guys are looking towards, what you guys want to hear us talk about, because we've been doing this podcast for a very long time and we've been doing it a certain way. And look, I know that sometimes not every episode is for every person. I hope that this episode is for every person because I think there's a good story to be told on this one. But understand when people just kind of want to tune into their own things, we want to make sure that there are going to be things and going to be content that people are going to be interested in moving forward. So that's one of the reasons why we're going to have a town hall coming in the next week or so. But again, Javier having some health issues this past week kind of put that aside a little bit. So we will do that at some point in the future. But we do have two brand new patrons. I'm actually going to mention, I totally forgot about that. And I'm very, very sorry. But yeah, we have two brand new ones joining up on the Giggle Leg tier, which means she gets to pick an episode for us to cover. One of her favorite shows. Julie, thank you for joining up on the Giggle Egg tier. Officially the first new patron of 2025. So really appreciate that. And that's coming after a couple weeks of begging, I'm sure. But also, that's not it. We got another patron from our friend Kaz, who joined up on the bonus like tier, and Kaz was actually involved in the setlist Hangman, and he joined up because he wanted to check that out. So if you are interested in checking out either the setlist Hangman or checking out the Evolution episodes from the past or anything that's on there, even if you went to any shows last year and you want to go back and listen to some of the reviews, they're still very, very good. I even go back any time that I kind of want to rekindle with a memory from a certain show how I was thinking at that time compared to what I think about the show now. I'll go back and I'll listen to it a little bit, but the reaction episodes are still there. You can listen to every reaction episode that we've done from 2022 onward, and of course this next year we're on the books for 11 of them, and it'll be a little bit different this year. We'll try and figure that out as we go because there's probably at least one that I can't be there for, but we'll figure that out, of course. So if you want to contribute to what we're doing, help us out and help us on some of our funding on the tour, please head over to patreon.com/live on four legs or download on the Patreon app and just look for Live on Four Legs, and that will get you in, as well as going to liveonfourlegs.com and going to the top and clicking the Become a Patron button. That will get you there as well. Again, it just kind of goes into everything that we're doing here. We don't sell commercials. We don't do any advertisements or anything like that. It is all funded by you, the listeners, and that's where we appreciate all of you. So, yeah, all good stuff coming up in the future. And I mean, we got you sitting right here. A couple weeks ago, we had Brian on, and I was saying, Brian, when are we getting some new hallucinogenic recipe episodes? Because it's been a while.
We're like the Olympics. We come quadrennially. No, we've got to get our shit together, and we will, because we got some good stuff to talk about. We've got to get it on the books.
I mean, it is winter. This is around the time of the Winter Olympics, usually.
Yes, this is true.
Do we have to send you to Provo or something like that?
No. I'm not that posh.
All right, back to the rock. So it says, Merci beaucoup, a toast to you. I'm going to make an attempt at something here. When the Ramones retired, a few of them weren't ready to quit working. One of them is the guy that worked on Johnny's guitars all those years, his right-hand man. And when the Ramones retired, he became my right-hand man, and he's been with me every day since when he got fired in 2013, Ricky Ramone. Yeah, that's the Sirens debacle where switching over the 12-string guitar was apparently something that became kind of controversial. And yeah, Ricky Ramone has not been in this crew for about 13 years. So that's that. But yes, it's a tie-in because there was, and he would mention it a lot when they would play, like, I Believe in Miracles. He would say, oh, we have another Ramone on here. We have a Ramone here every day. But Ricky's no longer with this band. So he's saying we're going to get through this one together tonight. So I'm going to give this one a shot. And this is where we get to the second Cat Stevens song of the night, which is Trouble.
Trouble set me free. I have seen your face, and it's too much for me today. Trouble, oh, trouble, can't you see? my heart away, and there's nothing much left of me. I've drunk your wine, you have made your mind, so won't you be fair? Oh, won't you be fair? I don't want no more.
Now, for many of you thinking like, okay, why would he do two Cat Stevens songs in one night? And neither of them, look, Cat Stevens was kind of a solo artist on his own. He didn't need any accompaniment for the most part on most of his records, but it's just Ed on these, and there's a reason for it. So, one of Johnny Ramone's last wishes before he passed away was for Cat Stevens to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And if that's surprising to you, I guess it shouldn't be, because I think a lot of people kind of see the Ramones and see for what they are on the outside and see for what kind of music that they play, that they're this band that's kind of gruff and would be into harder edge stuff, but like a lot of their influences come from guys like Buddy Holly. You can hear it in Joey Ramone's voice every time he sings. He sounds exactly like a punk rock version of Buddy Holly. Like a lot of that stuff. I mean, how many 50s and early 60s songs do they cover? Like Do You Want to Dance and Surfin' Bird and some of those other songs. Like that's what was within their wheelhouse. So it shouldn't surprise anybody that somebody like Cat Stevens is someone that Johnny really admired.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I, at the time, had no idea of it. I just assumed when you got the double, I was like, there has to be some connection. Johnny must have loved this, and that's why he's doing it. Because it was just too odd that both of them showed up in the set in the same night with the preset and this kicking off the encore. But I'm there for it. I mean, these are two of my favorite Cat Stevens songs, and I never thought I would see either of them, let alone both of them on the same night.
Yeah, they were great. It just kind of sets the tone for this encore too. And you know what? This encore, I call it, whenever I see something structured like this is the Grand Rapids encore to me, because you have all of these songs. You're leading up to a live, which is going to close the encore one, but you have all of these songs that are more either acoustic based or mid-tempo based, something a little bit more lighter, and it follows within what they did at that Grand Rapids show, where I think that really became notable at that show. Obviously, it becomes notable because of some of the songs they played, like Hard to Imagine and Around the Bend, but it's a very similar structure. I believe in that show, they also closed the last two songs with Crazy Mary and Alive as well. So this is kind of fitting that same exact structure there. And a lot of these songs, I mean, you got Man of the Hour following up on Trouble. You got Harvest Moon. It was the second time that they did Harvest Moon. Like, these fit into kind of a pattern that they would end up doing a little bit in 2006. And then onward, when you think about the Lightning Bolt tour, every single night they would sit down and they would do kind of 3 cool down songs to start you up before getting into bigger stuff to close out Encore 1.
They start this process really in 2004 during the Vote for Change tour. They have basically a first encore that builds slowly. Not always Ed playing solo, but usually every other night would be doing like a one-off song, and then they build and play a couple of slow mid-tempo-ish songs, building up to usually something a little bit harder, whether it's Alive or Porch or Rearview Mirror or whatever. But that structure builds itself through the 05 tour, and then, as you mentioned, becomes a mainstay for some of the 06 shows. Not every night, but particularly like a lot of the Friday night shows seem to get them, because they did it in Albany. They had a little bit of a mini cool down set for the encore, and then, as you said, that becomes a huge part of the 2013-2014 tour, really having every night there's an encore that is for the record books in terms of the way it's structured and the songs that they're choosing. that all definitely coalesces around Grand Rapids. Like Grand Rapids is sort of the first time that it's like a wow moment for everybody because of the songs that they lopped in there. And it becomes a regular of the set list when they're playing those big long shows.
So, of course, Man of the Hour here is another nod to Johnny. And one of the things that I noticed is that Mike is playing way off to stage left here, and Stone is way back. You mentioned how he was kind of like perched in between like Matt and Boom, and he's really in the background. I wonder if they were just kind of giving room for Ed to sort of take a spotlight and be the focal point of this performance, because I was actually bracing for it to be a tearful and emotional moment, but I feel like it almost didn't need to be, because that moment in the show was release and that took care of that, but it still was pointed, still had the message that it put across. And of course, there aren't going to be a lack of dedications from this show. And I think when you are grieving somebody, Man of the Hour would be part of that to honor someone.
Yep, and this is the first time I caught this one live, and the way that they set it up for these shows, it kind of kicks off this way each of the times they played it on this tour, where it's really just Ed and Matt's kind of just doing very, very light drum part, and then it builds itself into the apex of the song, and the other guys kind of come in. So it's a transition from him doing a solo song and then the band members coming on to join for the rest of the full encore. But I loved it. I thought it was very, very, very well played.
So right here we have Last Kiss, Harvest Moon, and Last Kiss is nice. It kind of played into the 50s, early 60s vibe that the song gives. And not that other versions don't, but the sense is that it's stuck more within the mid-tempo. Again, going back to who the Ramones were influenced by, I think Ed says something that Johnny liked this song beforehand.
Johnny loved
Yeah.
this song. This
Yeah.
was the one where when it got big, he said to him, he's like, you guys really have cornered the market in teen death songs.
That's right.
So yeah, he was a big fan of this one. And they played
Yeah.
pretty well. Like I could take it or leave it at this point, but for this era, it was played exceptionally well. Sometimes you could think about in this era that it was kind of forced into the set list a bit, but I think it really worked this night.
And I mean, you're take it or leave it, but I seem to remember you emphatically leaving it in
Yes.
Nashville a couple of years ago.
Yes. I mean, I'm trying to be kind because this was a special night for the dedication. But yeah, at this stage of the game, I could leave it.
All right, so Ed's gonna invite Slater Kinney out to do Harvest Moon. That was something they did at the previous show in Hamilton, and the only other time they did it
It's with
outside of
Neil.
these two shows was with Neil in Toledo. Yeah, so this was really the beginning of them kind of getting together with Slater Kinney, and thankfully this is the only Slater Kinney bit, because I think enough people know my takes on the leaving here bits with Slater Kinney that don't happen at this show, thankfully. But I've had similar thoughts about utilizing them on this song, and really this one didn't bother me. I thought their harmonies were actually really good. Sometimes Carrie gets a little out of key, and that can just irk me just a little bit, but I thought that they actually managed it really well. I thought this was a really sweet version of Harvest Moon. It's one of my favorite songs, and it brings me back to a place where I was very young when I first heard the song, and heard the song a lot when it first came out in like 1992, 1993, when that album came out. And it just kind of brings me back to just simpler times and simpler memories. And hearing the song in this capacity, like I would love to hear it at one of their shows one day, but I know that's probably kind of past its prime at this point. But I thought this version, they did a really, really nice job with it. And then the girls at the end kind of have this cute little synchronized dance to it. And also this doesn't usually happen, but I thought Ed crushed the harmonica bit.
He
That-
did. Yeah, he
Yep.
nailed it. Yeah, he nailed it. This song was perfectly built for this time frame that they chose to start doing it, and you have to have the female vocals to make this one work. I mean, if you listen to Harvest Moon album, there's no way to get around that elements that Astrid Young and Peggy. And this was probably a much better fit than Leaving Here in terms of where they blend in. So top notch.
Because I'm still in love with you on this harvest moon.
Now, Crazy Mary and Alive are going to end the Encore 1, but I'm going to kind of get ahead a little bit, and I don't mean ahead in the set, but ahead in shows. We talk about that Ottawa show, and one of the shining moments from that Ottawa show was Crazy Mary. And it felt like at this point, Crazy Mary was really going through a bit of a renaissance period. So remind everybody of like what happened during that Ottawa version, and did you notice like little hints of what might be to come from Ottawa in this, or was this completely different?
This is very different. The sort of rebirth of Crazy Mary when Boom came in 03. You started to get the bombastic trade-off versions. One of the first ones that comes to mind is State College, but then they had a couple of others across the summer in June. So there's a bunch of those that are like building over time. And this particular version is much more, they go at it for a couple of minutes, but it's very, very prescriptive, if you will. And I don't try to say that as a pejorative, but they're not open to eating a lot of time. They knew that they had a set limit to what they were going to be doing. So it's kind of playing and trading off one another and building that feel. But this is a different animal than what happens the next night. It sounds great. It's very, very well orchestrated, but the next night is just next level.
Yeah, that's, again, one for the ages, that version. I think that Grand Rapids version too, like those two can go and have their own duel, and you'd be pretty fucking impressed. So Alive is going to close out, and I thought that was a really, really good version here because you got that kind of grooved in the pocket pace. It still has all that frenetic energy to it, but what I love when the song can be in the pocket and not go too completely off the rails. Again, energy was really, really good, but pacing is what gives the song its groove. And of course, when you get to later versions of this, I think, especially when it's the beginning of the end of your night, they just kind of go all out on it, and we lose sight of what versions like this are. I kind of like that this one had that approach to it.
Oh, totally agree. This is one of the better versions of Alive that you come across. This is one where like you can kind of lose it in the playback of the hundreds of set lists that you go through, and whether you're a subscriber to Nugsnet or you've got all these things downloaded onto your computer, it's probably not going to be the first thing that you're jumping at from time to time. But when you get yourself locked in to listen to a show and you get a version like, it's a pretty big treat. And I'm going to say it again. This is a Jeff clinic. I mean, he is just so damn fantastic on this song. It is like worth repeated sit downs to listen. And you're really getting the heart of how he attacks this song in a way that you don't normally hear on their bootlegs.
All right, let's get into Encore 2 here. Ed thanks the crew for getting them across the expansive, elongated, beautiful country. You can count the number of times on his dick that he said this, because it's never been said before. Stone loves when he curses on stage because it's a fetish of his. He says he doesn't think they've ever thanked a promoter before, but the guy named Paul Merce, who was working with them and booking all of their spots across Canada, says this is how it should be done across the world. He made it possible for us to play all of these shows. And the last large group of people to thank is you. So thanks for coming. Yeah, that is very, 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 even to this day, very rare that he ever thanks a promoter, because usually it's not the most glamorous job in the world, and most bands would probably have some disagreements here and there, but apparently this guy Paul knew what he was doing, and they would come and do a shorter version of this a couple years later in 2011, but I'm waiting for them to announce some sort of semblance of a September tour where we get a good old-fashioned Ontario and Quebec run here, because they haven't gotten Dark Matter yet. So let's see. I think it's still, I would still put it on the table, I think. Right?
I was shocked to realize that they have not been to Montreal since 2011.
That is surprising.
So yeah, hopefully that would be great if they could do a run of shows up there. I would definitely get to a few of them, and I would love to go back to Montreal. It's been a while.
Yep, same here. I mean, Quebec City has usually been the spot that they've traveled towards, but I mean, I'd go to anything within the vicinity. Ottawa is apparently a 3-hour drive from me, so I can sleep in my bed after that one, I suppose. So we're going to open up Encore 2 with Whipping Down in Blood. It feels like they really kick into this, and they're playing off of emotion still, but like now they're kind of able to compartmentalize it and sort of just play without that big storyline being on top of their mind. And Whipping is a ton of fun. I thought, you mentioned Jeff a ton of times. I thought Jeff sounded really, really good on Whipping, and the transition into Down was very interesting in between the two. So I give that some credit, because I don't think I've heard the two songs together like that before. But Blood is pretty wild in this too. Like, you get Ed just kind of sprawled out on the floor. His head's sort of perched on the amps, and there's just a lot going on. So what's your takeaway?
This is like an old school Blood. This is like 1993, 94. He's vocally very into it. Yeah, they'd obviously played it a bunch in 03 when they brought it back, and this is the 5th, I think, of 10 times they played it on this tour, but it just sounds so damn good. Outside of the really musically great jams that they did in 1995, and then the 96 stuff that they would do where they were kind of morphing that a little bit, but still adding a pretty big tag onto Blood in those years, this is probably one of my favorite years for it. And this, up until this year, was also was the last time that I had caught Blood live until Fenway of this year, and I'd rather remember this version.
Yeah, I wouldn't really consider what we saw back in September. And it's funny, same dates, 19 years later. Yeah. But yeah, I wouldn't consider that to be, Blood.
That was not a high mark. No.
Right. So the way that we're doing bread and butter at this show, since we already crossed Alive off the list, is Black into Baba into Ledbetter. I kind of love that. I kind of love how Black is being put into that spot of being like the go home before putting the party into full swing. And I thought that this version of Black is just, I mean, we've talked about 2005 versions before, and we've called that the quote-unquote Gretsch era, even though Stone is not playing a Gretsch during it. That's something that Javier obviously pointed out, but it sounds kind of like a more traditionalist version of Black. And I think with Ed singing at the top of his lungs and letting the crowd get after it and doing the Why Can't It Be Mine and all that, like, just really kind of one of those versions where everybody is locked in on. And another thing that Javier can sit here and talk about if he were here would be, I think we have the vacuum, I think we have the Pog in this. So, I mean, he sounded phenomenal, but yeah, this is a very, very good version.
Stone has that steel hollow body that he's using on this tour, and that just sets a great opening tone for the song. And then Mike is just completely on fire. And, you know, again, I'm going to say it again, Jeff Ament, he's playing like a lead guitar player on bass on this song. And if you just sit down and listen to it, it's like listening to the song in a totally different way. But yeah, back to back, this night and the next night are two of the best versions of Black that you could ever ask for.
Ed at the end there asking for the crowd to light candles.
Yeah.
And it's actual fire at the time. There were no flashlights on your phone because you're probably having the Nokia bricks, right? Or flip phones.
I think at that stage, I think I had my first flip phone. I can't remember if it was that year or the next, but around that time. So it was either a brick or it was the first flip phones. But yeah, everybody had their Bics out.
Real fire.
For the young folks out there, a Bic is a lighter.
Can't believe we actually have to explain that. And because young people do listen to this podcast, we do. So, but I think that, you know, most people are pretty privy to lighters. It's not like lighters go out of style or anything like that. So, yeah. So, Baba, fun. Jeff and Mike are having fun doing this. They're kind of dancing around in circles together. Ed kind of laments in Ledbetter. Again, one last time to pay tribute to Johnny. Says it's been a fucking year, but everything has changed. Like, that's, you know, felt like in a good moment. And then he says, and this kind of has an indirect tie-in, I think, with Comeback, but he says, I'll see him again in my dreams.
I was wondering if you picked that up. That was one of the things that I noted too. He said, I'll see him again in my head. And I'm like, that's definitely, you can tell at that point, either the story that brought Comeback out had happened. You know, he had that dream that he was literally with him. He thought the nature of talking about it that way, see him again in my dreams, in my head, it's just too on coincidence that would be evoked in that spot.
All right. Well, at the end, Cameron says, thanks, Piggy, into the microphone. And we finish off the show with that. Again, a real heavy heart kind of night. And we know how the band can get when they're paying tribute to a lost loved one. I mean, it's happened multiple times, and the theme really stayed on point for this show for sure. So let's get into some top moments from this. I will start here first, since you were present at this show, so you get to get last licks a little bit. I'm going to go number 3, and I'm going to say Better Man with the I Want to Be Your Boyfriend tag at the end. I thought was tremendous. There's a lot of moments that I could pick from this show, and I think that is kind of the first thing for number 3 that popped into my head, but I easily could have taken Save You or Sad or Harvest Moon for sure. Number 2 is going to be In My Tree, because I love hearing the alternate version of this. And then number 1, I think it all kind of kicks off and starts with this. And from an emotional standpoint and from a thematic standpoint, I can't pick anything but Release for my number 1.
I can agree with that. I'm going to go in a little bit of a different direction. My number 3 is Porch. I really find it to just be a really tremendous version, even though it's short Porch, but it's on point. My number 2 is Light Years. I think that kind of just hit the nail on the head the best of the tribute songs to me. And my number one, even though it's not played perfectly, mostly from the lyrical content, it's just so damn good, is Sad. The band sounds so good on that song that I would just like to have someone overdub a different set of lyrics on it. But it's an unusual choice. I'm gonna say that like right off the rip to say, okay, I'm going with that as number one. But it's really just tremendous how locked in they are on it, and it's allows you to completely get out of the fact that he messed up the lyrics. Once he's past that, and you get into the core of the song, it's gone, and he just hits the nail on the head.
Okay, now we get to our rating aspect of this show. So I have a couple of thoughts. This is going to be a pretty high rating from me. It's not going to get the perfect score, but I think it just gets right in between there. I really enjoyed this, and I love shows with themes. I love shows that have a reason for happening and when something's on their mind and when they play up to that. Obviously, with the influence that Johnny had on not just Ed's life, but let's face it, all of their lives, putting together the set list and that big chunk in the middle where it's Miracles and Light Years and Grievance and Sad and Given a Fly and Love Boat Captain and the I Want to Be Your Boyfriend tag off of Better Man. There's a lot there to unpack. And then even going into the encore, the bit with Trouble and Man of the Hour and Last Kiss, like there's just a cohesiveness with the set list construction that works perfectly for this. I don't know if there's any other type of tribute show where it's this jam packed with songs made for this kind of moment. But I thought they did a really good job, and I thought the performance excelled because of what the night was. So I'm giving this a 9.5 show. And I know that we had talked about before we started recording that you thought that this was maybe on the sliver tier right before getting into the top tier stuff for the Canadian tour. But I think that I would put this into the top tier, but granted I wasn't there, so my opinion is lesser than, so I want to hear what you have to say on this.
I don't think I won't say it's lesser than. It's just from a different angle. I would give this an 8.5, a very strong 8.5. And I just think it's hard for me to decompartmentalize this show from what happens the next night. There was a heaviness to this show, and I was glad to be there to witness the evening. And I think there's some tremendous stuff that happens this night, but it was weighing on Ed, and to some extent you could almost feel like it was weighing on the rest of the band, like trying to hit the right notes, trying to hit, no pun intended, but trying to hit that sweet spot. And I think they did a really fantastic job. It's a lot to put on the table, and I give them a lot of credit, particularly Ed. He could have just said, I'm not going to deal with this. I don't want to try to do this on cue for everybody. But he decided right from the get-go, he's crafting a set list that's going to be built around his friend, and he's going to tell everybody about it. He's wearing the shirt, and he made this entire show about Johnny, and it's tremendous. And it's no knock on it to call it an 8.5, a 9, 9.5, what have you, because this is just an incredible run, this entire trek across Canada. And you could pick out any of these nights, and you could pick out any selection of 3 or 4 songs, and you will always find something to dig into from this era. You're never going to be lacking for enjoying a show from this September Canada tour. And if I was only at a single show, which has happened before, I might have a completely different vantage point of what this night was.
Well, I appreciate the viewpoint of it, of course, and thank you so much for jumping in at short notice. I literally texted you at like 9 o'clock this morning after hearing from Javier saying no can do for today. So I appreciate the short notice on that. And that's where you get into the hero books in Live on Four Legs lore, but you were already there way from the beginning. So it doesn't even matter. You just added to the story, but appreciate you. And I'm looking forward to those hallucinogenic recipe episodes coming at some point in the future.
I will get them scheduled. I promise.
Well, next week we're going to have another really, really good show, and I can't wait to do this one. And if Javier, for some reason, can't make it, I'm sure you're going to be excited for this one as well. This is, I believe, a 8-man show. Tampa 2000 we're going to do.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Believe it or not, we have not done that one yet. And I'm very excited. It's been on kind of my short list of awesome shows that we just need to do. And we've done a lot of shows and we've hit a lot of those type of shows, but we still have so many more of these to go. And I think Tampa 2000 is one of those shows where it's like at the time people wanted to get their hands on this bootleg and it's a big one. So I have not listened to it in a very, very long time. And I've only really listened to a lot of the good highlights from this, but I'm very excited to get into this. So that's what we'll be doing next week. Again, another anniversary, 25 years. So
it's a great one. 8 binaural tracks, 5 Vitology, 5 verses. The encore is just, are you kidding me? If you got that encore today, forget it. You just say, all right, it's time to pack it in.
We'll get it next week. We'll talk about it in full, and hopefully you guys will be back to listen to what we have to say. So if you like this episode and you happen to not be subscribed to any of our platforms, please do so. That way you will know when our episodes pop up, and maybe you'll see a show that, hey, maybe I went to it and maybe I want to listen to it, or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe I don't know anything about this show and I want to listen to see what they have to say about it. Then that's another reason why you can subscribe. All the episodes come out on Wednesday, but it's always good to get the pop-ups anyway. It can happen on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, wherever it is, but wherever you do subscribe, please help out. Make sure you leave a comment, or you can leave a 5-star rating, or both. It helps us out. It helps out the podcast. Anything at this point is extremely helpful for the algorithm and for the next person to go in and check out what this podcast is all about. Because good vibes and spreading the good word is what this world is all about, right? Yeah, just positivity. If you got something negative to say, just say it to my face, right? Yeah, I can take it. But anyway, let's close this one out properly. This may be the end. We're here, but not for much longer. And although we may be parting ways, miss you already, miss you always. Well, we are back next week with Javier for Tampa 2000. And hey, I'm excited. It's actual baseball season. And one of the things we didn't mention from this episode was that I was very surprised that Ed did not mention anything about the Montreal Expos, because it was almost exactly 1 year since the Expos had their last game. So I'm surprised he did not mention anything. But, 20 years later, and now the Expos fans are ready to get a new ballpark and ready to have an expansion team over there. And I could not root for that anymore. So just figured I'd bring that up because February and the weather that we're having up here in Syracuse, New York has been awful. And I just want to think about good things like baseball and green grass right now. So that's the way we'll close out this show. So for this one and for Tampa 2000 next week, we will see you on the pod.
Take it easy.
I like to sing, but I can only wish it on away. Yeah. It's been a fucking